And she was in Afghanistan, and she like did these things like that were unbelievable, like helicopters, explosives, driving trucks, getting all these missiles, roadside missiles, driving this truck. It just like, and I looked at her and I was like, how did you do this? Like, how did you? She's like, oh, it's easy. I just went into denial.
That's just a way of changing the story, honey. It doesn't heal anything. You could see that.
Well, yeah, that was the thing. But
Yeah.
yet, that belief system might have kept her safe.
No,
or...
no, pardon me. But it can't keep her safe. It might allow her body to alter its experience, but it will not ultimately even keep her body safe. No thought can exist apart from the whole. So you see, when she's automatically separating herself, creating a separate chapter, to a subhead to the story, nothing has really changed.
What would be the difference between the worldly use of denial and the proper use of denial?
Well, the proper use of denial, of course, is that this isn't real.
Yeah.
That everything I see is an illusion, is unreal. That's the only real proper use of denial. That's what we're talking about right now. It's to really bring ourselves to a point where we can make a legitimate decision about the reality of the world. Nothing unreal exists. Can we really accept that? Or do we continue to just make denial in different ways? We always then just find a way to get ourselves around the crux of that issue. Does it exist? So I'm going through all of this as a way perhaps of trying to illustrate why I've asked us all to do this thing together. Because if what we're being taught is true, if we will come together around the denial of the idea that sin is real, that it doesn't exist, then the world is going to change. Now, as I say that, watch yourself. Watch all of the thoughts that begin to spin off of that.
So it's not, so I'm not, yeah, so I understand I'm not there now.
Right, and why?
Why am I not there now?
Well, yes,
Because I feel separate.
because you don't want to be.
I don't want to be. Oh, because I don't want to be.
You
I don't want to be.
don't want to be. I can tell you something that you know, and I know you know it. If you really wanted it, you would have it. So why are we so attached? Why are we so attached? And what is it that we're really attached to?
Guilt.
Fear.
You hear that? How can you be attached to guilt? If you were not, any of us were not attached to guilt, there would be no reason for us to project it onto someone else. So as long as you make a judgment about someone for anything at all, you know it comes from a place of guilt. And that's simply an acknowledgement. You're really what the Course teaches us is that you're really defending your little acre or half acre of guilt against the world.
My 14 acres.
If I can take my 14 acres and project 13 of them onto you, that leaves me able to cope. That's our attachment to guilt. But the Course teaches us, don't you see, all of that is simply a way to postpone the issue. We've got to decide that the guilt, the sin, the guilt, the separateness is not real.
We're here to do, express love.
It is. But to do that, to allow ourselves into that state of mind where that can happen, we can't have the contradiction of the guilt. And to not have the contradiction of the guilt, we can't want to protect that little part of the world that we claim as our place of guilt. And the only way that's going to happen, is if none of it is real. None of it.
It's like a
None of the
circle.
guilt.
Why do we want to protect it?
Which seems to protect us from the broader scope. Why do we make Donald Trump wrong? Doesn't it somehow make it easier for us to be right? To justify our rightness about how we feel? And how can I ever make someone else wrong without making myself wrong? Can't. Our doing something in the terms that the Course speaks about it generally speaks of our need to try to understand. In other words, he'll give us a principle and say, step back from this and allow the Holy Spirit to do it for you. And the first thing we're asking ourselves is, well, what does he mean? How do I step back? I'm trying to figure it out. Instead of just relaxing and saying, oh, okay, I'm going to step back. And I'm going to invite the God self in. It's just that easy. But when we start trying to figure it out, then we're getting involved. And that's when we screw it up. What I'm trying to bring up for us to look at here is the reason for that is because that's what we want. Because until we all come to grips with what we really want, then this study of the Course and whatever else you intend for your so-called awakening is not going to go anywhere. Where would you be if you had nothing in your life but love? Because once we get past what it seems to mean on the surface, we begin to really ask ourselves, well, where would I be? Am I completely loved? Am I totally lovable? What happens if I'm not? So what are we going to do now? We're going to go through our lives like we always normally do. And when something comes up that we're making a judgment, we're going to stop and say, I'm not going there. I'm not going there. God self, show me why I don't need to go there. And watch what comes up and ask each and every time. Ask to see what's behind it. And then to let it go. You want to change the world? Do you really want to be free? This is the nitty-gritty. Those are beautiful questions. But what do you do with the question? See, that's just going halfway. The other part of the way that we're going to try to do together is we ask. When that question comes up, get an answer. Otherwise, it'll just come up again in some other form. Be determined to know, to change your mind about every situation. Let's make notes of the situations that we find difficult next week when we do this. I suggest that for a couple of reasons. One is to keep us interested in doing it for an entire week. And when we come back, let's see how we can help one another. Perhaps how you will tune in to this group and allow the feeling, the light that is in this group to be your help. We were having a discussion with some friends a couple of days ago, and one of the issues we were talking about was developing trust. And so just in my mind at the time the discussion was going on. I asked Brother, I said, what would really help us become more trusting? And he said, well, if God walked into the living room now and sat here with you, would you find that as evidence of your ability to trust? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, look around.
So, when my son-in-law was released from jail that weekend, I was so angry.
Let's, keeping in mind what Teresa's situation has been, and we all have circumstances in our life that even though they may not be quite that traumatic, that we can somehow relate to what it feels like to having fear clutch us. And yet it's so important to us, studying what we're studying, to be able to see how these principles are able to guide us and become the catalyst that allows this change to take place within us. See, honey, the thing that's so obvious to me that you just were kind of taking, or failing to take for granted, was how quickly you went to that place where you understood there was another way to see. And how much of the world that we recognize today, or that we are aware of today, doesn't recognize that that's true. In that regard, let's take a look at our feelings around the Orlando shooting. How that impacted each of us and where we went. Because that's another typical example of what Teresa is talking about. So I would appreciate any feedback that any of you might have. How did you react? How were you affected by these circumstances? Were you afraid? Were you angry? What came up?
It's just nuts, you know, and I don't get angry, I don't get upset, I just observe that it is insane.
That's the key for all of us to remember. The Course says, if it doesn't exist in the mind of God, it isn't real. It doesn't exist at all. And yet how easy it is, for instance, for Teresa, to see all those bottles and suddenly see something in this world that would seem to justify her fear. Is it true? Could it possibly be true that if we did not find reason for these fears to exist, that the shootings and the bottles in the trash can would simply not be there? You see, when we're talking here about what Brian suggested, that it wasn't real, are we being asked then to simply overlook what our eyes do see and say, well, after all, that isn't real? Or is it being suggested to us that if we do the work, if we come to the conclusion, Mary, that there's nothing within us that needs to be hurt, there will be nothing in the world to hurt us? This is the decision that we have to come to. Because in the one case, we're always going to be battling with this fearful idea of whether or not we can change our mind to cope with the world, or whether or not we are going to be absolutely free if we only cope with that one idea within us that sin is real. Which is it going to be? I'm actually suggesting that nothing but God's plan exists.
That's the way it is.
That the story we make up, the characters we create, absolutely do not exist once I stop telling the story. This is not something for me to learn to cope with. It is for me to see that I am making up this story, and when I stop making up the story, it's gone. So, what did we do when we saw the circumstances, the newscast of what happened in Orlando? What did we do? See, that was our opportunity. It's your opportunity, honey. What to do when the police come knocking at your door, or you go out to the garbage can. Those are the opportunities we have to really step back and ask ourselves, what does brother mean when he says, see this differently and it will disappear? He doesn't tell us to learn how to cope with it. Just as you suggested, Teresa. When we do change that dynamic from fear to loving, everything else changes. When brother tells us, forgive the self you now see and simply love it, he doesn't say what that would be, which self that would be, how enlightened that self should be, how loving it should be. He just says, whatever it is. Whatever it is, love it. Because the love itself is going to change the dynamic of everything else. And that must be because of what we're just saying. When we change what we want to see, our mind shifts. And as the mind shifts, what is there in the mind to be reflected in the so-called world will automatically happen.
I was thinking about the after of that, all the love that has been shown.
That's another trap. Not that the love is wrong, but if the love is coming from a place of sorrow, it's teaching us the wrong
The
thing.
wrong thing. Okay.
Love to be love must always be joyful. It must come from a place of joy within you. Otherwise, it's not teaching the right thing. It's not expressing the right thing within us that is going to change everything else. Because don't you see, that's all we're learning. Everything else is just to grease the slide for us to be able to sit back, step back from all of our fearful imaginings and say, wait a minute, if I love this self, I will know God. Because to love it, to truly love it, wipes away all of the illusions about it. When he says, it is but an idea irrelevant to what is seen as physical. In other words, what he's saying is that because you believe that you are separate from God, separate from your source of life, it would be entirely likely that you are going to see everything as being an experience or a call for that to be true. And that becomes how we see the body. And the body then becomes a manifestation of that thought of separateness. But death is not about the body. Death is about the idea that makes the body seem to be necessary. It is about the idea of separation. The body is simply the manifestation or the justification for our belief that separateness is real. But it's our body predominant, because everything that we see then just becomes a mirror for that body. If the thought of the body changed, you wouldn't be able to see anything else physical. Only the thought of separateness in the mind gives rise to the possibility of what we call a body.
That's why God knows nothing about any of this then.
Well, God knows what we think about it, but God doesn't accept the reality of it.
Because it's not. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
That's a misunderstanding too. A lot of people say God doesn't know anything about the illusion. God doesn't see the illusion. Well, God doesn't see the illusion, but he sees us seeing the illusion. And that's why he gave us the Holy Spirit, because that's the bridge that gets us past the perception that sin is real.
Could you say that the Holy Spirit occupies the gap? Would there be two
The
limitations?
Holy Spirit is the bridge over the gap between the right mind and the
That's right, because the gap
Wrong
wouldn't be,
mind.
the gap's not real,
right.
so it's the bridge over.
Yes. It is the fixed belief. Ideas can leave their source. In other words, it is the belief that you can leave God. You can be separate from your source. And so everything else in the world with that belief must become a justification for that belief. So we very kindly acknowledge that by projecting all of our thoughts onto the world. And we believe that by putting them out there, they can be separate from us, and we can be rid of them, just like we have tried to project ourselves away from God. Once that thought controls our perception, everything in our perception must function to justify that thought. Think how that controls our life. And now I ask the simple question, what can you do that would best change it? What could you do that would best change that thought? Wouldn't you have to forgive the idea of separateness? Wouldn't you have to accept the possibility that the one you condemned for the shooting massacre was simply an extension of what you are? You see, the moment I say that, the fear arises. You see, how could I be a part of that shooter? That's not what we're saying. What I'm saying is that he is a part of you, not the character in your story. He is a part of you, and together we are the expression of God. As a summation, let's say, about how we could see the events of the Orlando shooting in a different way. We have this mistaken impression that what we're trying to do is to atone, or is to have this character in the story we've made atone for what has happened. And the truth is, that character in the story is nothing. That character in the story doesn't exist. It's the dreamer of the dream who will awaken. So we're saying, in accepting the atonement, that the dreamer of the shooter and the dreamer of me
It's the same
are
dream.
the same dreamer.
Yeah.
And there's no distinction can be drawn between the dream he dreams and the one I dream. One dream no more real than another. A couple of mornings ago, John and Linda and I were having our morning meditation together. We were talking about something similar to this. And I asked Brother what would be a good way to think about this oneness, this concept, idea of oneness. And he said, first, appreciate everything that God has created, the magnitude of the wholeness and the love and the joy that's embodied in this creation. First, just allow yourself to fully appreciate that idea, and then accept the fact that that was his gift to you. Now, for a moment, then you stop to think, well, what does that have to do with oneness? But it has everything to do with it, because that's my gift to everyone, in addition to having gotten that gift from me. And then how easy it becomes to accept everyone who is simply an expression of that gift. How much more plain can he state it? It is a story. It has no real content. And having no real content, it cannot exist outside the bounds of itself. The story exists within the story, and that is all. So what will it take for us to awaken from the story? What will it take for us to find the dreamer behind the character in the dream?
Forgive everything in the story.
And love the self you see right now. Don't you see that it was the rejection of the dreamer that led to the dream? It led us to reject the Holy Son of God and create another character that was something different that we thought we could hide from God. And so to unwind that whole scenario, it requires that we step back and say, wait a minute, there's no reason not to love this beautiful creation of God. You look at a circumstance, a situation that arose in Orlando, and you say, my goodness, the whole consciousness must be falling apart. But that's not true. When you recognize now, as we've been talking, the unreality of what happened, and realize what we're trying to come to is an understanding that it isn't true, and therefore it isn't happening, then all we're looking at is the ego insisting in the most vicious way possible that its perception is true. And that's what the world becomes a mirror for.
That fear is real.
That fear is real. Let me keep conjuring up the worst possible scenario to distract you from your belief that this is not real. And so we continue to do that. But all it is consciousness trying to justify accepting the belief that sin is not real. What is the quickest way for us to recognize that we can do what he asks in this paragraph? Let us today be children of the truth and not deny our holy heritage. What's the one thing in our daily experience that we can do that will most quickly bring that to our attention? I think it's simply to decide that I will not judge anything that I see. Like this woman from Iceland said, Michael asked her, he said, well, what message would you give to the American people? And she said, you couldn't pay me to live in the United States. She said, I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I could not be comfortable living in a country where people allowed other people to go hungry or to be without health care when I knew I could do something about it. So you could tell what she was advocating was she was advocating because it felt like a loving thing for her to do. It's hard to say how far we're going to push the pendulum. Really is hard to say. But wherever it goes, it's up to us to remember that it's really going nowhere. Because the release, the ultimate release, is when we finally look at the whole thing and say to ourselves, there really, truthfully, isn't even anything to let go of here. This is nothing. This is a dream. There's no substance to any of this. When we recognize there was nothing of substance there, we will be awake.
To do that and still be in body.
Death is not about something physical. It's not about the body. It's about the idea of being separate. It's about what the body represents.
Would you say what the ego represents?
No, it's what the body represents to the ego.
Isn't it kind of the ultimate idea of separation?
Well, that is the ultimate idea, yes.
Which is a phony idea to start with.
Yeah.
So you eliminate the need to be separate, and what happens with the body is irrelevant. You can have it or not have it. Because you see, it's not a factor. It's an effect, not a cause. It's interesting in the course, I can't remember exactly which lesson it was, but one of the recent ones that we've had, where Brother says that the idea of death does not pertain to the body.
Yes.
Do you recall that? That the idea of death is a manifestation of our need for separation. When you think of the phrase living forever, do you imagine that that's in a body? For you, would that incorporate a relationship to the body? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be alive, as we all must be, of course, and not have a body? What would that be like, having a world without bodies?
Without a body, what do you do?
You see, that's what it always comes down to, because we imagine that it is the body that's giving meaning to the things we do. But the scope of that lesson was actually to begin to teach us that the body, right now, the body plays no part in the things that we do. We may seem to be doing them as a body, but within the body itself, there is no way to determine whether or not it was pleasurable, whether we were having fun, or whether we were miserable. Because the body doesn't register anything of that nature. That is not the function of the brain. The brain has one function and one function only, and that's to regulate and run the body. That's it. So what function is the body serving for the mind now in the experiences that we have? So mind is giving meaning to what the body does. So, what purpose is the body serving? That's what this conversation is all about. Really for us to come to the conclusion of the awareness of, are we in a body? Are we in a body right now? The Course makes a statement many different places that in any given instant the body doesn't exist at all. And yet we seem to be so attached to the idea of having a body that this thing we call death becomes the distraction from living in truth. As you can see what Betty was reading about there, all of the different ways that we use the idea of death to prove there is an opposite to life. But at the root of them all is our attachment to the idea of separation. That is the idea that the body serves for us. So, Right, I'm sorry, I cut you off
It
there.
just seemed to me like the body is supplying the mind with sensory input that confirms, the mind then confirms that the body is real because it's getting all this input from the body.
Maybe a better word would be feedback.
Yeah.
Is the body providing the feedback?
Well, I think so. You know, the sights we see, the sounds we hear.
Hang on just a minute.
Yeah.
Let's recall what we just said a moment ago. The brain serves only the function of regulating the body. And the brain gets the input to regulate the body from the mind. Because the brain is purely a physical item, so to speak. So where is all of this sensory input coming from? In terms of what we call it, the difference between mind and body, where is the sensory input coming from?
Well, it appears to be coming from the body.
It appears to be coming from the body, it does, Brian. But in truth, it does not originate there. But we're still looking for some function that the body serves for us.
Can only do what the mind tells it to do.
And that's it. And it has no other function. So, what do we use it for? It becomes a tool for believing, look at all of the other bodies around and how it can hide itself amongst all of those other differences and ways that it has, judging and being better than, worse than, whatever, all of the others. And that is an effective way, it thinks, an effective way to hide from God. So what do we need it for? The book says that during the time that we still believe that we are a body, the body serves the function of communicating with other bodies. Do we really need it to do that? No, we don't. Think for a moment, if mind creates its own world, and it creates the world that it wants, then think about all of the things that we want that seem to entail what would benefit the body, and how useless, how utterly, absolutely useless that becomes, because it's not bringing us what we want at all. Unfortunately, Brother tells us that we can't actually share a vision that we have. That's a personal matter. But what we can share is our intention. Personally, I can't honestly tell you that I have ever had a vision of being at one with everything. I have had some meditations where I achieved a level of a nice sense of innocence and a willingness to join. But whether or not I ever actually did join, I can't honestly say, because I'm still here. I'm still believing that the body serves some function for me. So I don't know. We all know by now that the only thing that keeps anything from our experience is our reluctance to have it. So identifying all of the reasons that we are reluctant to experience a body, primarily being the reluctance to speak of death, because that's what we're most afraid of. Why, now what we're doing is seeing that it's not death at all that we're afraid of. Because death is simply something that is an idea of the mind that it applies to our sense of who we are. But we are not that character in the story, in the dream that we're talking about. So the only thing to fear that God has withheld is love from us. And how would we, from a practical point of view, how would we move past that reluctance? Wouldn't I be open to receiving the love of God if I was open to giving you all of my love? Giving and receiving must be the same. Giving love, receiving love, same. And there are no distinctions drawn between who we give it to or who we withhold it from. If I am willing to love you, then I am willing to receive the love from you and the love from God.
And the converse of that is true.
Yes.
And so in any form of defensiveness is my unwillingness to love and be loved by God.
Yes.
And therein lies
Yes,
that.
exactly. And you're absolutely right, Tom. Therein lies the function of death in our experience. We're all too well aware of what seem to be the effects of the so-called evil that transpires in the world, the attacks. We notice those very, very easily. We were watching a film last night on pretty much the history of Islam. And not only to see the role that aggression played in the unfolding of that religion, but of how all of the other religions that were interacting with it were doing the same thing. Whether it was the Mongols attacking from China, or the Turks, the Ottoman Turks, or whatever, or the Crusades, the Christian Crusades. It was all an interplay of attack and defense. And yet the religion itself didn't teach that at all. The religion itself was an attempt to get around the idea of attack and defense. And yet it was being used for quite the opposite purpose.
It seems like so much of my life is pervaded with ignorance. I'm not exactly sure where it stops and ends and ends, but I just feel uncomfortable with it and I want to escape from ignorance.
That's not unusual, Sam. You've picked another subject that the ego can use to evaluate you, whether it's something that you can or can't do, or something that some intelligence that you may or may not think you have. There's always some form of lack, something that you potentially or positively lack.
That constant sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. When you stop for a moment and consider the stage upon which all of this plays out is the same for all of us, because the stage is the mind, and the mind is shared by all of us.
But the script is written.
The script is written to me means simply that it's done.
Yes, that all this is an illusion, and we will recognize
Yes,
that.
it's done.
That is the script, yes.
The face of Christ. What is the face of Christ? But he who has stepped a moment into timelessness and returned to the world to bless it with the unity he found there. Just to step a moment beyond the confines of our ego. Whatever you do in your meditations, do that. Find some reason to allow yourself to escape from the limits of your perception. These are the things that we rarely hear about from the world, and yet they are the illustrations that we are changing.
Yes.
Everything is changing. We're doing it. If you have any moments of distress this next week, please try what we were talking about. Try what we were talking about and get a feel for what this group really is. And thank you again for your, using this group or tuning into this group really means so much more than what appears on the surface. One of the things that we're trying to learn is what exists beyond the superficial appearances of the bodies and the places in the world and so forth, but to try to penetrate, to move into that place where we live, so to speak. It's really important for us, and we can use this group because we are all so comfortable with one another. We can use this group very nicely to help ourselves learn and appreciate the feeling that comes from that. There isn't any way I have of being in the presence of God that is more important, more perfect than all of those that I see Him in. So when I trust myself to be able to see God in you or in this group, functioning as this group, my goodness, what a blessing that is. So use us to find God. One thing that it helps to keep in mind when you're having a conversation with someone who professes not to believe in God is that that's impossible. If you're alive, there is something inside you that must acknowledge the source of your life. Otherwise, you can't be alive. Now, we can ignore it, we can say we forget it, we can push it to the back of our mind, but it's always going to be there. And the beautiful thing about loving is that that's the one thing that allows it to come forward, allows that awareness in God to come forward.
Yeah, but see, he would disagree with what you just said. Because he would just say, look, there was
Denny,
cells,
please.
they multiplied, Denny, eventually it was consciousness.
I'm saying go past all of those words. They're irrelevant. All of those words are completely irrelevant. Those are just the defenses of trying to convince you that he was unlovable.
I'm sorry, that he was what?
That he felt unlovable. And what's the answer to that? What's the only medicine?
More love.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of that pointing out, it goes nowhere. But what does have effect, and this is something that I can give you the words, but you have to feel it. You truly have to feel a sense of loving, a sense of connection, I mean, in truth within your being. And speaking any words at all to him with that feeling becomes the acknowledgement of what he needs to hear.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't matter what I don't need to change his.
But it would, Denny. It would. You see, there's no accident that we ever are with the people we are with. The reason I'm bringing this all up right now is because I think you still have an opportunity. You may not see him again in person, but you still have an opportunity to connect and ask yourself, if you can't find that feeling, why? But I would feel very surprised if you couldn't find it, just in listening and feeling the effects of your conversation. Hold him.
His son comes to visit.
Hold him in that awareness, because that's what he came for. In many different ways throughout the course, particularly in the lessons, Brother tries to help us see that we have a function in the world, and that our function is one that he calls forgiveness. Well, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is seeing the face of Christ everywhere you look. And so here you have a function of bringing this look of love, the face of Christ. And you're Jewish, but you know what I mean when I say
Yeah, sure.
the face of Christ. But to bring that to everyone who comes to you who doesn't seem to see it.
No.
Well, the other thing God's going to do is to help you forgive yourself for the mental lapse, let's say.
Yeah.
When we look around, we watch the news or walk down the street or listen in on a conversation like Denny was having, anything that might try to convince us that there was something other than love that was true and real. How many of us are there who can step back from that and have the learning, the awareness now to say to ourselves, wait, that's not where I want to go. This is what changes the world. Well, I recently had a second chance too.
Yeah.
I've shared with you all the experience I had who called with the Eastern accent. I suggested karma, and he suggested that he was going to eat me like a dog, and it led me to wonder what I kind of like what we're talking about with you, Denny. You know, what would have been a more loving approach? And the other afternoon, Linda was out for a walk, and the phone rang, and I kind of absentmindedly picked it up, and someone said, seemingly like it was a notice about my credit card having been hacked or something, and that they could help me get to the bottom of it. I mean, it was almost childish in the silliness of the way it was approached. But the first thing that came to my mind was the other experience that I'd had. And I thought, thank you. And I said, I'm really kind of in a hurry, but there is one thing that, and I'm going to have to hang up, but there is one thing that I'd like to have you know before I go. And he said, what? And I said, that you are tremendously loved. And there was just this silence. And I said, I hope you can accept that, and hung up the phone.
Wow.
So we get second chances. I just heard something that I'll pass along to you. I just heard you can love your brother and recognize you are part of God, or you can join with your brother and recognize that together you are God. A cautious friendship and limited in scope and carefully restricted in amount. In other words, we become enamored of our brother's behavior and tell ourselves that is how we must see him. That's the way that we limit how close that we're willing to allow others get. The judgments that we place upon their behavior.
I wrestled with that a little bit today. I was in Paulsbo and I was leaving from the Central Market to go out to the highway. And there's this young woman sitting there with a cardboard sign asking for money. And so I'm thinking, well, should I give her some money? And then, going through my mind, she's probably on drugs. And then it's going through my mind that I'm not a very loving person, that I'm thinking all this, And I did keep going down the road, but it's been bothering me ever since.
So what are you going to do about that?
I don't know, maybe the next time I am in that situation, I'll fork over some money, help them out.
It might help, Brian, just in your quiet time tonight, to sit back and say, why did I feel that way? What was going on? What was I really seeing in her, in me, that provoked that? And use the opportunity for forgiveness to change the way you see it. Because I'm fairly confident that it wasn't about whether or not you gave her money. These are good opportunities. But the truth is, the one fundamental thing that we fear that we all have is the fear of lack. That somehow we'll be lacking in love, we'll be lacking in money, we'll be lacking in health, whatever, we're going to be lacking something. And the best way we have of recognizing that's not true is to give what we think we lack. So it's not about the bodies, it's about the agreement that we make. And what does he mean by the agreement that we make? It is the condition that the ego consciousness sets for being with someone. That's the condition under which it agrees that we should meet. So how can we overcome this? How can we recognize that when we are with someone and they seem to, let's say, reject us or attack us in some way, that there is a way to overcome that? How do we recognize that? The Course does it so simply. It says, see everything as a call for love or an expression of love. How much simpler can it be? And then your bodies seem to get in touch and thereby signify a meeting place to join. But it will never be the bodies that join. Even as we sit here in this group, looking at all of our presences being registered as a body, that's not what's happening. We wouldn't be here if in our mind we had not agreed to join, because that's what this book is all about. And we have come here because we recognize that that is what we really want. So what I'm saying is you can recognize that in every meeting that you have with anyone at any time. We're saying that that is the ego's reference point, so to speak, for our meeting. But we can meet instead in the presence of the God Self. And believe me when I say there is equal reference made to both God and Self. Isn't that what we do? Just allow ourselves a few limited indulgences in loving. Maybe we could do this next week. Maybe we could make as kind of a project to be conscious of every encounter that we come across, whether it's the most casual, where we may not even be exchanging words, or something that's, we would say, what's deep and meaningful. To be conscious of those encounters and ask yourself if you are trying to limit the love that flows between you. Okay, the handouts that I passed around 2 weeks ago, Tom asked me if I had ever had an experience that we could call oneness, and I didn't think that I had. So I asked to have one, and this is a summation or a summary of what I experienced. So I thought I would hand that out to you. I had the experience, and then I realized that there was more to it, so I went back 2 more times and actually brought it back again. But this is kind of a summary of everything that happened.
Okay. I ask for a vision of oneness that I can verbally conceptualize and share with others. A feeling of the universe comes into my mind. It is infinitely filled with many colored planets and stars whose light beckons lovingly. It is awesomely beautiful. Everything seems so different and so the same, each so needed to make the others shine so brightly, be as beautiful as they are, and they seem to have no other purpose save to shine their light and reflect their beauty. There is a sense of both excitement and contentment at the prospect of what was unfolding there. It feels like a kind of fearless adventure in loving, a happy and playful exchange of delights. I look for words to better describe this feeling, but none arrive. It is simply a sense of loving and being loved that is so strong it has become a world, a universe for loving. I wonder where I am in all this. There seems to be a kind of explosion. And now I am lost in the midst of a collection of unrelated planets and stars, a jumble of unidentifiable a jumble unidentifiable to what I had seen before. My sense of peace is gone. The joy of loving everything I see has left me. My focus seems to zoom in to a spot, somewhere unknown to me. It is isolated and barren. I feel alone. The thought comes, somehow when I projected the where am I thought, the I lost its identity with the universe and became associated with the individual planets which I do not relate to. It is the feeling of what we have defined as the Big Bang, splitting the one whole universe into different galaxies, planets, and stars. I feel lost in the confusion this represents. I remember what I have asked for and mentally review. I realize everything that has happened has been in my mind, my choice of how to see what was there. There was no breaking up, only my change of focus, my choice to find a me that wasn't really there. So I said to myself and to the universe, this is not what I want. I don't want to be alone. And in a virtual blink, the universe I had seen returned and was as beautiful and as loving as it was before. It felt so right, so perfectly natural and satisfying. After a bit I asked, why was I able to do all that when I don't seem able to change what I see, what I now see here in this world? The answer, in this story, you knew you were the author.
It seems not to convey the experience, because when you put it down in words, it all runs together. But these things all happen, and then there would be times in between, and then you'd come back and well, anyway, there may be some thoughts in here that might help you.
Have you been able to go back to this?
Yeah, several times.
Well, it seems to me that when you wondered where you were, Tom, that's when the whole thing changed, because you were focusing on...
That was the enlightening moment for me, yeah. I was aware of two things, Brian. One, that nothing was happening except my thoughts. Nothing was changing, nothing. Literally nothing was happening. And yet everything seemed to be different.
Well, it was kind of the separation thought, wasn't it, Tom?
It was a separation thought. But the important thing for me to recognize was that it was just a thought, and there wasn't really anything going on. I'm sure it's going to be quite a long time for any of us to finally become aware of what it feels like to simply be a thought, an open-ended thought that has the ability to become anything that you choose to have it be. I'm not sure I understand. In fact, I am sure I don't understand most of what was going on. And what I put down here is just my impressions. So if you have any impressions, I would greatly appreciate your feedback.
If we knew we were the author of our whatever we saw, would we be able to come and go or have different?
We would, but that was a dilemma that first became obvious to me. But the second thing, the thought that arrives right after that, is that if you find yourself in a totally loving place, or a place that you have determined is totally loving, why would you want to go? What would be the motivation for wanting anything different than that? So being in heaven, why did we decide that there would be something else? That's the part that just, I can't comprehend.
Well, that's what I meant when I said that when you wondered where you were in all of this, that's when it changed. So you were in this first place, everything was great. Why would you wonder where you are?
That's my question.
We would all wonder that, huh?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to me, it's a pretty strong lesson in not wondering where I am, to try and stay away from that and identify with the whole rather than with Bryant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good insight.
That's it. How do we feel comfortable in where we are now, or where it seems we are now, in identifying ourselves with the whole?
But it's still an interesting question as to why originally did we.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't make any sense for sure, whatever the answer is.
Yeah. Doesn't to me, for sure.
Because how could you want more than the whole anyway?
If you didn't know you had the whole.
Yeah.
I think that becomes the question.
Well, here we are all sitting here.
Yeah.
You're already split, and you're already split, But why would the one want to split?
Yeah.
And once you're split, then they can see it all.
Have you ever heard brother or anyone say just curiosity? No?
I haven't, no.
I read somewhere that the tiny mad idea was something like, I wonder what it would be like if there were more than one of us.
The statement, where am I in all of this, is a statement of specialness.
Special, yeah.
I suppose you could take that and say, where am I is a statement of oneness as well. It all depends on where you're coming from.
Yeah, that's true, Brian.
Yeah.
I met a woman. The thing is that at that moment it was like this love that I felt for her, each other, and just being in each other's presence like that, not wanting that world. And what was the same between us, and what was the connection between us. And it's just so old and so ancient. And why am I sharing this? Because I guess I grapple with this idea of so much pain and yet love.
Where did that lead you to see yourself?
In which way? From the experience of being with this
Well,
woman?
when you began your discussion by saying you asked, what this meant to you. What were you told?
I have to keep revisiting this experience in order to love.
Okay, that's good, but why? What about it is going to teach you to love?
I don't know how to answer it for myself when you ask me that.
Well, it was feeling to me like you were having some questions answered that maybe you hadn't recognized you even had the questions. Okay, this was really helpful, I think, because what you're talking about is the essence of why we see differences in each other instead of the same. So what was this brokenness about? Try to be in touch with that. What did the brokenness literally symbolize?
Separation.
So it was a feeling of you being broken. How?
I'm still not sure. I don't know.
Could you feel separated from yourself?
Yeah, it's like parts of me separated.
Okay, so nothing ever comes to you unless it comes in the form potentially of being a healing. So what was there that came to you that would heal that thought of being broken?
A joining together, love, a joining together. It's like becoming more whole inside of myself. It's like she's a fragment of me. It's all fragments of me, and it's almost like getting the chance to go back in there, and instead of being disconnected from that fragment, it's like connecting with that fragment of.
Great.
That's
That's beautiful. Yeah.
This interaction with her is what's happening out there.
But where's the healing in that?
In here. That's where the healing is.
Yeah. So what, but in here, yes. But what in here? Doing what in here? Now, the feeling, or is there a feeling that by accepting her, that will heal more than just accepting her?
Totally. It was like a family feeling. It was like, it's right here and now. This is it. It was like, this is it. And like what you said, it's to find myself.
I think that's so interesting that happened to you right about the same time of your uncle's visit.
Oh, that's right. My father. Yeah.
Now that all starts to come together now. The primal, the family feeling of all of that. How you now have more pieces that you can put together. Honey, if you can in your mind more generalize the experience that you've had. In other words, literally give it to the consciousness as a whole. Give it to them. Your intention for using that as a healing tool can then be more effectively used. Because you see, you are the consciousness. And your intention is what the consciousness pays attention to. Do any of the rest of you ever have that awareness? That when you have a thought or when a revelation of sorts comes into your mind, that if you give it to the consciousness, you literally are changing the entire consciousness?
Does that work both ways? Negative?
It's already working. When the very fact that you can feel a pain that comes seemingly from somewhere else in the consciousness is the other side of that. It is our presumption that we are separate from the consciousness that makes us, or should make us, acutely aware that just the opposite is true.
I'm stuck on a lesson, I think it's 132, and it says, the exercise is, I lose the world and all I thought it held and choose my own reality.
Yeah, well, that's a very real way of doing exactly what we're talking about. 3 or 4 mornings ago, I woke up with a voice seemingly shouting in my ear, Allah Akbar, Allah Akbar. And it took me, I don't know how long, to finally come to grips with, what is that? What does that mean? And then to know or to recognize that somehow in my sleep I had gone into the consciousness without being conscious that I was doing that. And I was literally hearing a scream from a part of the consciousness, not seemingly my own. You see, there is only one ego. It is this thing we call a consciousness. It is the idea that we are all separate, but we share that idea. And we make the consciousness, well, I more aptly should say, We either promote or heal the consciousness by what we contribute in our thoughts, moment to moment, day to day. For a few moments when that happened, it scared the poop out of me because I didn't relate to it at all. I had just come out of sleep and I wasn't logically reasoning or falling back on any of my awareness or anything. But Brother very unequivocally has taught all of us that the only place that we can go with any of that is to the God Self. And simply say, you know, where should I be in this? What should I do? Help me to hold a loving presence. So I can't tell you specifically what I did, but that other than that.
Isn't it all a perception, though? If you hear Allah Akbar, you're thinking right away of a Muslim extremist.
Exactly.
But if you say God is great, you don't think of a
No.
Muslim extremist.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing happens by accident. None of those thoughts come by accident, even into the ego awareness. So it's coming to you because you are a good place for the forgiveness that is needed to happen. We are asking to overcome the illusion and move into the presence of the truth. Well, the truth is that we are all connected. That this thought of pain, the thought of anger, we're all connected to all of that. And yet, to deny it, to pull away from it, to say, I don't want that, is just denying what we're asking for in our studying. So the thing that we have to learn to do is to handle it in such a way that it too becomes a tool for our healing. And the primary way that we do that is by asking the God Self to show us what's real and what is not. So when feelings of pain, feelings of anger come forth, if my first thought is to say, this is not real, but it is in my awareness and therefore it is something that I need to attend to. So show me, God Self, Holy Spirit, show me what to do. Show me the thoughts that will be the most healing in this circumstance.